There is no doubt League has had its fair share of oppressive champions over the years, but I believe it is starting to reach a boiling point of having too many. As we've seen with recent releases and reworks, champions are starting to be equipped with a ton of tools and power, and some of it has been shown to be overwhelmingly beyond measure. Things like this have long-term rippling effects to the game that will force Riot to make dramatic decisions down the line. Now, I have to make sure degeneracy is understood, since the word degenerate would be associated with something like scummy or douchebag by many. Degeneracy in the game is when something within the game with long-term appeal or competitiveness impacts the nature of the game, often it being its quality. In essence, an item or aspect of the game merely existing could worsen the future prospects of the game, often because it is too game-changing or miles better than comparisons. In the case of this video, there are some champions in League that are just far better than other champions that their mere existence makes all other champions in the same role far worse. Other champions will now be constantly compared to them, and their quality is gauged based on the new, often ridiculous standards this champion has created. Why pick X when Y is simply better than all other options? If a degenerate aspect is allowed to persist, then all future balanced decisions and all future champion releases will have to take it into consideration, and thus begins a power creep and an arms race as a result. As I said, this is not limited to champions, and League has actually had several of these things throughout the course of the game, and their effects are still being felt. Summoner spells are constantly criticized for being impossible to balance and honestly degenerate aspects of the game. Exhaust cripples assassins to the point where all you need sometimes is a well-placed exhaust. Ignite crushes healing if it's too weak, and so on. However, the most degenerate of all of them became a staple of balance for the game. Flash is literally one of the most important balance factors in the entire game. The entire game is balanced with Flash in mind. There is a reason it is basically the summoner spell you can guarantee will always be taken. When it was becoming a problem initially, Riot nerfed it repeatedly, but you simply can't contest an ability that lets you reposition instantly. The mobility meta became the basis of the game as a result. All champions in League need some form of mobility, or else they are underwhelming. If they have no mobility, then they tend to be insanely overcompensated for it. Some things are too established at this point, so it would be impossibly risky to just remove them. At the very least though, champions are not immune to this, even though they can pose the same kind of problems. I want to establish a few things before I start naming champions. It does not matter whether or not these champions are currently overpowered or underpowered. The mere design and saturation of their kit will make them problematic as long as they remain the way they are. Their mere existence makes other comparable champions worse and affects the balance of the rest of the cast as a result, sometimes even beyond their own role. In a way, you can say that these champions are simply too good design-wise. Also, keep in mind that this list is in no real order. The first one on the list is one of my personal favorite champions, Gragas. Ever since his rework, he has been a staple of the game as the go-to all-around tank. Simply put, he is one of the best tanks in the game more often than he is not. He's only ever really outclassed when someone else has a numerical advantage or is overtuned for some reason. Gragas has everything you would want in a tank, and then even beyond that. Gragas packs mobility, a spammable AoE stun/knockback, an AoE slow nuke, damage mitigation, a passive that heals him considerably, on-hit damage melee nuke, healthy stats, and arguably one of the most overpowered ultimates in the game. He can be used as an initiator, a peeler, an AP bruiser to actually deal considerable damage for his role, or in some cases, a straight out mage. He's adequate in the jungle and can be relied upon not getting rolled by other junglers, and is simply efficient beyond reasonable means. Here is the challenge. Name a tank that comes close to being as powerful all around as Gragas. Yes, there are some tanks that can do some unique things that Gragas can't, but that makes them specialized picks that will be taken because that is a quality a team wants. However, in a general sense, Gragas just covers everything a tank wants and then some. There lies one of the bigger problems of his existence. Since he can do everything, there is no reason not to just pick him even over some specialized champions. Sure, X tank could do a certain thing better, but you also need these other qualities which that tank lacks, but Gragas likely has. Gragas has reached a point where he's a jack of all trades and a master of everything. This next one is one I personally despise, Calista. Even though right now she's in an iffy state, her current weakness only came through a series of constant and drastic nerfs. While her E was pretty stupid for taking objectives and her ultimate was an insane playmaker, that stuff could generally be worked around in the future. Unlike Gragas, Calista is degenerate because of one simple aspect of her. Calista's goddamn passive is one of the most insane things to ever be given to a champion. It alone exacerbated the mobility meta and forced Riot to absolutely dumpster her as she was degenerating not only the marksman role but also mobility in general. When you degenerate mobility, you screw over tons of champions who were already struggling with it. Basically put, Calista's existence made the lives of melee champions hell alongside whoever she was laning against. Its maximum power could only be truly achieved by people with adequate kiting skill. Either way, it became a notion of either banning Calista or picking champions that could deal with her. Tons of melee champions simply became risky picks as they ran the chance of simply never doing absolutely anything to her. Riot basically had to give her some silly bandage nerfs to just utterly stop her. I have no doubt she's going to be a problem for balance in the future unless they decide just to force her to the sidelines. The next one is perhaps one of the more confusing releases for League, Noire. Riot knew very well prior to his release that ranged champions have consistently been an issue with top lane alongside resourceless champions and those with sustain, and even so they released Noire, who had all of that and more. Noire is a ranged champion with low cooldowns, if you do him right, reasonable mobility and kiting potential, and is resourceless while also having percentage damage. Noire can also transform into Mega Noire, which has its own abilities that are much stronger and even have powerful crowd control attached to them, while also having an AoE ultimate that sets up the rest of his abilities. Out of all the champions on this list, this is the one that makes me ask, what the fuck were they thinking? This is literally all the problems they had tried to mitigate over the years packed into one champion. Riot has had issues with transformation champions, and they make a quasi one that is barely balanced around it being uncontrollable. They made a champion that has bursty sustain when he transforms, while also being able to kite all of his opponents to hell and back. They made a champion that is a ranged bruiser that has no resource management other than not failing his abilities. By his sheer existence, a lot of other top laners are just worse because they can't deal with Noire. Champions will now have to be considered with that in mind as, like Gragas, he has become a safe staple for top lane that isn't a terrible pick unless you need something more specialized. Again, I simply don't know why he exists the way he does, but he has noticeably damaged top lane as a result. Thankfully, in solo queue, players aren't so quick to play him, so at least you see a variety in top lane. The next one will make all of you rage in agreement. Soraka. Even rioters have come out and said that she's impossible to balance and she's a constant pain. You can even Google a reference from beta where a writer flat out says she will be a problem for the future of the game and that she has no place in this game. Soraka has had as many reworks as Rise and is still looking at likely future changes. She's the ideal healer and that's generally all she does or generally all they want her to do. However, as it has been shown every now and then, when her healing is good, it is too damn good. And then as a result, she causes games to drag on and entire confrontations or plays to become absolutely meaningless. She makes flashy plays worthless, she makes trading pointless. All she does is press one button to make your maneuvers pointless. The difference in effort is astonishing too, of course. I don't even need to say much more about her really. Her mere existence can dictate how Grievous Wounds works, how slow the meta can become, and whether or not some champions are even worth picking since they can't deal with Soraka heal spam. In truth, she's just part of a larger problem in that healing has historically shown to be an issue with League, but she's one of the biggest offenders and is often a catalyst for any support or sustained issues that crop up. The next one is more personal because she's just sort of destroyed the jungle. Nidalee keeps getting nerfed and changed, and her effectiveness in competitive has been drifting on and off. However, in a general sense, her jungle prowess is so far above every other jungler that they're just sort of worse by default. Of course, the blame also partially falls onto Gragas, Reksai, and Graves, but Nidalee is largely the most responsible. She's way too fast, too safe, too efficient, and overwhelmingly covers many aspects of the jungle you want, and more than can be considered fair. She single-handedly made all control junglers absolutely worthless in comparison as long as they're not named Reksai, while being able to match up against other farmers and be adequate at ganking in a sort of pseudo-assassin sense. Anyone who is slower than her, which is pretty much everyone, or would be susceptible to invasion, gets absolutely rolled by her, and there's very little they can do because of the level she outpaces everyone. Even champions who are only mildly weak against invasions can find themselves overwhelmed by her. Junglers who were off meta but could still survive in solo queue are unsafe picks and hyper vulnerable to her. Even strong current junglers can fall prey and simply be irrelevant picks if they confront her. Playing against her is basically hoping not to get mangled and make it out of the jungle in one piece. She's the new Lee Sin, but with more tools for the jungle rather than combat, and with more overall reliability. I am unsure if Riot is accepting this or if they're considering breaking her apart just to give others a chance, but it is presenting a very pivotal moment for the jungle. If Riot lets her stay as she is, then other junglers are going to have to be compensated and buffed to her levels, or they'll continue to be dumpstered or be forced to lane or just be unplayable. The current jungle situation is that the ones at the top are just too grossly overwhelming and they encompass far too much power in comparison to the rest. In the past, the meta junglers tended to be specialized and only strong because they fit that current meta, but right now they're just too good all around and give no room for anyone else to be considered. Anyhow, as I said earlier, this does not take into account their current balance. This is just to showcase how degenerate and negative they can be to the roles they inhabit or to the game in general. Riot will either have to nullify the problem by making these champions irrelevant by extreme nerfs or reworks, or by making them the new standard and working the game around them, which in the case of Gragas and Noire they might be. I can't say much about the other lanes, but personally I feel the jungle is reaching that extreme point. Only time will tell what Riot decides to do, but hopefully they do help out the jungle. This channel is supported by my sponsors, Crunchyroll and Loot Crate. Check out the description below for links to the websites. Signing up for any trials, including Crunchyroll's free anime trial, greatly supports my channel. Also remember to give the video a like to support the channel and subscribe if you haven't yet. I've also made a Patreon now, and if you wish to support me through that medium, then I welcome it.